COVID-19 cases, the state added about 8,000 new cases a day in the past week on average. Texas, which accounts for over 10% of total U.S. cases, reported the largest number of new cases in the United States last week and was followed by the state of Illinois, which has half as many people. California, which was the first U.S. state to surpass 600,000 in August, is currently just short of Texas in the number of infections and deaths. The United States reporting a record number of new COVID-19 cases for the seventh day in a row, while the number of deaths surged to their highest daily count since August. After sharp criticism for not taking a stronger role in curbing the pandemic, the UN health agency, the World Health Organization, holds its annual meeting this week under intense pressure to reform. The World Health Organization is also hoping that President-elect Joe Biden will reverse a decision by Washington to leave the organization made by the Trump administration in June. Vowing to get right to work, President-elect Joe Biden shrugged off President Trump's fierce refusal to accept the election outcome as inconsequential, even as Democrats elsewhere warned that the Republican president's actions were dangerous. Raising unsupported claims of voter fraud, Trump has blocked the incoming president from receiving intelligence briefings and withheld federal funding intended to help facilitate the transfer of power. Joe Biden said Donald Trump's refusal to concede the election was an embarrassment, vowing to move forward with the presidential transition despite resistance from the White House and Republican leaders. Nearly 80% of Americans, including more than half of Republicans, recognize President-elect Joe Biden as the winner of the election after most media organizations called the race for the Democrat based on his leads in critical battleground states. Biden, who needed 270 electoral college votes to win, had 279 to 214 for Trump, with the results in 3 states that were not yet completed. International election experts invited by the Trump administration to observe the U.S. election last week issued a preliminary report that found no evidence of the widespread fraud alleged by President Trump. Democrats clinched 2 more years of controlling the House, but with a potentially razor-thin majority, a bittersweet finale to last week's elections that has left them divided and with scant margin for error for advancing their agenda. The party yesterday nailed down at least 218 seats and could win a few others when more votes are counted, while that assures command of the 435-member chamber. It is a Republican senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, who has been unanimously re-elected as Senate Majority Leader. The 78-year-old military veteran won his race against Democratic opponent Amy McGrath last week with a campaign budget of $80 million, and Democrats re-elected Senator Chuck Schumer from New York as the minority leader. Chief Justice John Roberts appeared to signal that the Affordable Care Act as a whole should stand during yesterday's Supreme Court hearings, which are part of a third attempt by Republican states to overturn the health care law. He echoed earlier comments from his colleague Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who suggested that under court precedent, cutting out the individual mandate while leaving the rest of the massive bill intact was straightforward. Both justices, one of whom would almost surely be needed to strike down the entirety of the law, indicated they would be inclined to keep the law in place even if they strike down the individual mandate. U.S. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris reiterated her stand on the Affordable Care Act, saying that every vote for President-elect Joe Biden in the 2020 elections was a statement that health care should be a right and not a privilege. Douglas Emhoff, her husband, will leave his job at one of the country's largest law firms by January to focus on supporting the incoming Biden administration. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden said he told world leaders calling to congratulate him that America is back, signaling the country's return to increased global engagement in a reversal of the President Trump's isolationism drive by his America First motto. And some dramatic moves on immigration are expected in the early days of the Biden administration. Repealing Donald Trump's travel bans on some Muslim-majority nations will be one of the 4 executive orders that President-elect Joe Biden plans to issue on his first day in the White House. The 29 men who died when the Edmund Fitzgerald sank 45 years ago are being memorialized this week throughout the Midwest in events from Detroit to Whitefish Point to 2 harbors in Minnesota, especially today on Veterans Day. And the United States has announced plans to sell F-35 fighter jets to the United Arab Emirates as an apparent reward for the Gulf state, agreeing to normalize ties with Israel. Turkey expects issues of poisoning ties with the United States to be addressed, according to its foreign minister in Ankara, adding the search for solutions to conflicts in Syria and Libya were presenting new opportunities to improve ties. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad blamed U.S. sanctions today and pressure on the United Nations and Syria's neighbors for the reticence of more than 5 million refugees who fled the conflict there to return. The Ethiopian Prime Minister, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year, has rejected a request for peace talks as the conflict in Tigray deepens. Several Ethiopians, including army soldiers, fled the escalating conflict in the rest of Tigray region to neighboring Sudan. And up to 200,000 refugees could pour into Sudan while fleeing the deadly conflict in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. Afghanistan's intelligence agency said they had killed a senior regional Al-Qaeda member in southwestern Afghanistan, accusing the insurgent Taliban of harboring him. Multiple people were wounded today when an explosive device hit an international ceremony commemorating the end of World War I at the cemetery in the Saudi city of Jeddah. Several countries had representatives at the ceremony held at a cemetery for non-Muslim dead. More than 2,000 African migrants stranded in a dockside camp on the Spanish island of Gran Canaria after a wave of arrivals overwhelmed local authorities' capacity to house them. And Pope Francis has pledged to rid the Catholic Church of sexual abuse and offered prayers to victims of an ex-cardinal a day after the Vatican released a detailed report into the decades-long church cover-up of his sexual misconduct. Britain and the European Union are likely to miss their mid-November deadline to clinch a post-Brexit trade deal because talks in London to break a deadlock are expected to run through the end of this week. The House of Lords voted resoundingly to remove controversial clauses from Boris Johnson's Brexit legislation as peers accuse the government of behaving like a third-world dictatorship. Conservative lawmakers have set up a new group to fight what they call a cycle of lockdowns to curb the spread of the coronavirus, yet another sign of discontent in British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's governing party. And Britain's drug regulators have said that it would not compromise on safety when it comes to deciding whether or not to approve a COVID-19 vaccine. Germany reported the biggest spike in deaths linked to COVID-19 since April. And as COVID-19 cases in Japan rise again, an expert advising the government said regions must take localized approaches to counter a possible surge during winter. Total coronavirus infections in Nepal have crossed 200,000 as health workers say the Himalayan nation was facing a catastrophic situation. In the past 24 hours, there have been 2,569 new cases and 26 deaths in Nepal. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. South Korea's foreign minister said she had raised the need for President-elect Joe Biden's administration to pay summit-level attention to reopen denuclearization talks with North Korea during meetings in the United States this week. And Australian police say they've rescued 46 children and arrested 14 men after an investigation into an international child abuse network. The Philippines has suspended its decision to scrap a 2-decade-old visiting forces agreement with the United States for a second time as the allies work on a long-term mutual defense arrangement. Myanmar's biggest opposition party said it would not recognize this week's general election and urged authorities to hold another vote with the help of the powerful military. And in a major development, the ongoing India-China border conflict may be resolved soon as the armies of the two countries have agreed to disengage from parts of eastern Ladakh, under which they would be moving back to their respective positions before April-May timeframe earlier this year. Brilliant hostile bowling took Mumbai Indians to an emphatic 5-wicket victory over the Delhi Capitals and a 5th IPL title yesterday. Cricketer turned politician Gautam Gambhir and England's Michael Vaughan have called for Rohit Sharma's elevation to India's T20 captaincy, with the former national team opener going to the extent of saying that it would be a shame if the star batsman does not get the role. India's ruling party and its allies have won a key state election seen as a barometer of Prime Minister Modi's government. The BJP's performance enabled the ruling NDA to attain a simple majority in the Bihar Assembly, despite a sharp fall in the tally of the JDU headed by Chief Minister Nitish Kumar. All India Institute of Medical Sciences said that the results of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine phase 3 trials are very encouraging, but preserving it at very low temperatures will be a challenge for India and other nations, especially in rural areas. India's COVID-19 caseload went past 86 lakhs today, while the number of people who have recuperated from the disease pushed the national recovery rate to 92.79%. The Delhi High Court lambasted the state government for its alleged lackadaisical approach in handling the COVID-19 cases in the national capital, and the nearly week-long spell of worsened air quality and a fresh surge in coronavirus cases have proved doubly detrimental to people suffering from respiratory ailments. The Supreme Court granted interim bail to Republic TV editor-in-chief Arnab Goswami, who was arrested last week in connection with an abetment to suicide case. Prime Minister Modi will inaugurate the Institute of Teaching and Research in Ayurveda, Jamnagar in Gujarat, on the 13th of this month. The United States Embassy in Islamabad apologized for retweeting an unauthorized post about the premiere by PMLN leader Ehsan Iqbal after it sparked outrage on social media. And Pakistan and Iran have agreed to make joint efforts for peace and stability in the region, including Afghanistan. There is a sudden spurt in coronavirus infections in Pakistan, with the rate of COVID-19 cases surpassing 5% after a gap of over 3 months. The National Command and Operations Center recommended early and extended winter vacations for students amid this rise in COVID-19 positivity. And that, ladies and gentlemen,